Hi, everybody. So, if you're coming to me at this point, hopefully you have completed the first task of the task list for this week, which is to complete the reading of the Norton Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. So, what I'm going to be doing in this series of presentations, I'm just going to be taking you really through some highlights of that introduction, some things that I really want you to take from that to think about here, and giving you an overview of some points to keep in mind as you work through those stories of the Old Testament that are included in that task list. So, where I'd like to start with looking at the concept of discussing the Hebrew Bible as mythology. You know, it's always a little bit problematic in a course like this where we're taking a work that is such a fundamental part of our culture's own faith and religious beliefs and kind of putting it on the same level with mythology and all of those stories from other cultures that we normally think of as just a bunch of old stories. Although at this point in the course, you should know that that is not quite true and not really the way that you should be thinking about these stories or approaching them, because all stories, this goes back to that very core principle that we talked about at the very beginning of this course. All stories reveal what a culture values, what is important to that culture, what is their belief system. And that is true regardless of whether we're talking about Greek mythology or what the West Africans believed when they created the myth of Sunyata, and what the early people of the Judaic Christian tradition believed when they created the scripture of the Hebrew Bible. So it's not saying one is better than the other or that one deserves to be believed and the rest are trash because they're just made up junk. That's not what we're doing here. We're looking at how these stories measure up against each other. So, yes, it does require some compartmentalization, especially, if you're from a fundamental Christian background. That's my background. It's what I believe personally. But again, this is not really about faith. It doesn't mean it's asking you to cast aside your faith. It actually, as your introduction states, should be able to enhance your personal faith, because it's going to allow you to understand it a little deeper, and to go a little deeper into your faith than perhaps you have previously, depending on what that faith is. So we're really looking at the Hebrew Bible as literature, and we're looking at it as mythology. And that's the approach that, we take with this unit. All right, so I'm going to move along. And again, I'm going to apologize in advance. As I've mentioned before, using screencasts, which is what I use to record videos, I'm having issues with not being able to get into slideshow mode. All right, I'm not sure why that is, but we will plow through. So here's an important point I want to address, which is we're really looking at the Bible as history. And so 3 important bullet points that come out of that is we're looking at the rise of Israel as a nation, because the Bible recounts that. We're looking at the establishment of Judaism and the rise of Christianity and Islam as major world religions. So keep this in mind. There are really not just one, but three religions, three major world religions that come to us through the Hebrew Bible. And those are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Right, so all three have roots in the Hebrew Bible. And you may wonder why that is. Well, the Hebrew Bible as a religious document eventually branched off into several pronged directions. For our purposes, we're mostly going to be concerned with those Judaic roots. Where Christianity really comes into play is later with the Gospels and the New Testament, which our textbook used to include. We don't really have any selections now from the New Testament. We mostly focus on those very, very early texts. But there is part of that that will be relevant that I will get into in this series. And so, yes, part of this is we're really looking at and sort of comparing and contrasting how the Hebrew God, Jehovah, measures up against revered gods from other cultures. What qualities does he have in common with them? Or what qualities do they have in common with him? In what ways do they differ? One thing about the Hebrew God, and but this is really true to an extent of all the gods of all the religions of the world, because they are, in essence, created in our image. The gods are very human-like, meaning they feel and they experience all of the same things that we do. And so throughout the Hebrew Bible, we see the Hebrew God Jehovah behaving sometimes in, we might say, very human ways. These are not necessarily bad things that you see on the slide here. They're just very human things. It's what makes us what we are. So we do go through emotions of jealousy. We sometimes feel petty. We sometimes act irrationally. We definitely get angry. The Hebrew God, sometimes for no rational reason, plays and pits favorites. This is a theme that comes up over and over in the stories, right? Because God has his favored children, his favored subjects, and this creates a lot of jealousy and rivalry among his followers. We even see that, just like some of the other gods from other cultures, he demands sacrifice. That's a very common theme throughout the Hebrew Bible. And not only does he demand sacrifice, but he demands blood sacrifice. The Old Testament God has to have blood to be appeased. Usually that comes through ceremonial rituals where animals are sacrificed. The Old Testament speaks over and over about the blood of the lamb, because it has to be pure blood. It has to be the blood of the innocent. Now, that is also where the sacrifice of Jesus Christ will come into play later. For this reason, there's been a lot of controversy about the Hebrew God. Some people say he's an old, wrathful, vengeful God. Not very nice, and we do see that he's often perturbed, perplexed, angry, and again makes some sometimes irrational decisions, sometimes decisions that seem to not make any sense, and definitely sometimes violent with this need for blood. and this demanding of sacrifice. So that might lead you to believe that this God is evil, to quote Joni Mitchell. But what changed? I'm seeing that the time is running very close on this video, so in order to give that the attention it deserves, I'm going to go ahead and stop my recording here, and I'm going to pick up in part 2 with a discussion of what happened and why this is why the Old Testament is so very different from the New Testament. All right, so see you in the next video.